She thought the hospital badge on my cardigan meant visitor. She didn't notice the gold pin below it, the one only board chairs wear. That one slap outside the ICU set a cascade in motion. Audits. Subpoenas. I promised myself no one would touch me again. By sundown, I held the authority to suspend the hand that did. My name is Eleanor Whitman. I am 62 years old, a widow living what I believed was a quiet, retired life here in Riverton. But the sharp, antiseptic smell of the St. Gabriel Medical Centre's intensive care unit hallway was a scent I knew too well, a perfume I thought I had left behind years ago. My son, Marcus, stood about 10 feet away, pretending to check his phone, his shoulders tense. He had been avoiding me for weeks, ever since his gambling debts started surfacing again, thick and suffocating. I was not here for him. Not today. I was visiting an old neighbor, and I had stopped for a moment to speak with another patient's mother, a small woman named Mrs. Alonso, whose hands were trembling so hard she could barely hold her purse. That was when Sabrina Lowell Whitman, my daughter-in-law, rounded the corner. At 34, she possessed a face that could have been carved from marble, beautiful but utterly cold. She was the acting head nurse for internal medicine, and she moved through these halls with an aura of untouchable authority. She stopped dead when she saw me. A small, tight smirk played on her lips as I offered the other woman a tissue. Mrs. Whitman. Sabrina's voice cut through the hallway's low hum, sharp as a scalpel. Visitor swapping is not permitted. Your slot isn't for another hour. I was just comforting Mrs. Alonso. Sabrina, I said, keeping my voice low. Her mother is in critical condition. Hospital policy is clear, she snapped. The other woman flinched and took a half-step back, disappearing into herself. We cannot have the corridors crowded. There is a vast difference between enforcing policy and practicing cruelty. Sabrina, her eyes narrowed. And you would know all about that, wouldn't you? Coming in here, acting like you own the place? It happened faster than I could process. The argument escalated in 2 breaths, her voice rising, accusing me of interfering with her staff, of undermining her. Then, the sharp, stinging crack. Her hand connected with my cheek. The force of it snapped my head to the side, my glasses flying off my face and skittering across the polished linoleum. A collective gasp sucked the air from the corridor. We were surrounded. Other visitors. Staff pushing crash carts. A security guard. My cheek throbbed, a hot, spreading stain of shock and humiliation. I bent slowly, picked up my glasses, and put them back on. I looked at Marcus. He was frozen, his face pale, his mouth slightly open. Mom, he finally stammered, his voice weak. He took a step, then stopped. Just don't make a scene. Please. This is Sabrina's job. He looked away. The other staff, nurses I faintly recognized, suddenly found their charts fascinating. A young resident quickly turned and walked into a patient room, pulling the door shut. The security guard, a large man who should have stepped forward immediately, merely shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes were locked on Sabrina's badge, on her title, acting head nurse. He was clearly, utterly intimidated. The silence in the hallway was louder than the slap. I slowly turned my head back to face her. Sabrina's chest was heaving, but the smirk was back, triumphant and ugly. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I looked past her, directly at the hesitant security guard. "Log this," I said. My voice was clear and cold, and it cut through the silence. "I want this documented in an incident report. Now." The guard flinched, surprised I was speaking to him. "And I continued, my gaze locking back onto Sabrina's, "will require a copy of that IR form immediately." I turned without waiting for a reply and walked toward the main elevator bank. As I walked, my fingers instinctively brushed the collar of my cardigan. They found the small, familiar shape pinned there, hidden just under the lapel, a tiny set of gold angel wings. It was a memento from a lifetime ago, a quiet gift from the board after I led the turnaround project that saved this very hospital system from bankruptcy. I thought I had hung up my suit jacket for good. Turns out, it was just out to be dry cleaned. The elevator doors chimed open. As I stepped inside, the sterile air feeling heavy and charged. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. I did not recognize the number, but I answered. Eleanor. The voice was old, familiar, and sharp. It was Arthur Graves, my longtime attorney and a board trustee. "Arthur," I said, my cheek beginning to ache. "They just finished the vote," he said, skipping the pleasantries as he always did. "It's a complete mess over there. Worse than we thought. The auditors are screaming. Are you willing to come back interim role? Full authority." The elevator doors slid shut, reflecting my face in the polished steel. My cheek was already turning a dark, angry red. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I am." I drove home from St. Gabriel, my cheek pulsing with a dull, heavy beat. The skin was already tightening, the first hint of a bruise. But the physical sting was nothing compared to the sharp, cold clarity that SLAP had provided. It was an X-ray. It illuminated the complete skeletal structure of the rot within that hospital. And it showed me the compromised spine of my own son. For 25 years. I was not Eleanor Whitman, the quiet widow who volunteered at the Riverton Library. I was E.L. Whitman, the Chief Operating Officer of Northwind Health. My specialty was not patient care. It was institutional resuscitation. I was the one they sent in when a hospital was bleeding millions, when the auditors were at the gates, and when mismanagement had driven a good facility into the ground. I stabilized budgets, I restructured supply chains, and I cut out the cancers of bad management. It was a brutal, thankless job, and I was very, very good at it. When my husband, David, got sick, I did it for 2 more years, running departments on conference calls from his chemotherapy sessions. After he died, I simply stopped. I retired. I sold the large Denver house and moved to this quiet corner of Riverton, content to let that part of my life gather dust. But the work never fully lets you go. I had agreed to sit on the board of St. Gabriel Medical Center a few years ago, mostly as an advisory role, a favor to Arthur. My involvement was intentionally low profile. I attended quarterly meetings by video call, reviewed financial statements, and offered opinions on capital expenditure. I was a name on a list, not a presence in the halls. Until about 6 weeks ago, the hospital's finances had fallen off a cliff. Malpractice insurance premiums had skyrocketed by 30%. Patient satisfaction scores were in the basement. And there were whispers, rumors that I knew how to read. Whispers of padded timesheets, of ghost employees clocking in for overtime, of critical medical supplies constantly evaporating from the inventory. particularly in the internal medicine wing. That wing was Sabrina's domain. Marcus had met her and married her in a whirlwind 6 months, a speed that had alarmed me. Almost immediately, an invisible wall was erected. Invitations to their home became scarce, then stopped. My calls to Marcus were often answered by her, claiming he was too busy or decompressing. She isolated him, skillfully, under the guise of protecting him from stress. My only true weakness is my son. I saw him sinking, saw the familiar shadows of his debt. But I held back. I kept my peace. I told myself that interfering, that challenging Sabrina, would only drive him further away. I chose to be quiet, believing I was protecting him from embarrassment. I had tolerated Sabrina's microaggressions, her veiled insults at family dinners, her portrayal of me as a doddering, out-of-touch old woman. I endured it all, trying not to make him choose. But that slap, that was not a microaggression. It was a declaration of dominance. I knew Sabrina's type well from my time at Northwind. In the hospital's internal newsletter, she was the angel of internal medicine, featured in photos smiling with recovering patients. But I had heard the whispers from Arthur's other contacts. In reality, she managed her staff not with inspiration, but with fear. She controlled the schedule like a tyrant, assigning unfavorable shifts to those who questioned her, using the threat of write-ups to ensure absolute compliance. The resident who turned away in the hall today, he was not rude, he was terrified. The call with Arthur had only confirmed what the board had been debating for weeks. The current CEO was ineffective, paralyzed by the crisis. They needed a fixer, someone who knew the system inside and out and was not afraid to make enemies. They had voted to oust the current CEO and install me. The vote had passed just an hour before Sabrina laid her hand on me. I sat at my desk in my quiet study, the house dark around me. My cheek was a deep shade of purple under the lamplight. I do not operate on vengeance. Vengeance is messy, emotional, and imprecise. I operate on process. I believe in audits, in bylaws, and in the cold, clean authority of a signed directive. I opened my laptop. The official email had just arrived. The subject line was stark, urgent, confidential. Special meeting of the board appointment of interim leadership, 7 a.m. At exactly 7 a.m. I walked into the main boardroom on the executive floor of St. Gabriel. I was not wearing my visitor cardigan. I was wearing a dark grey graphite suit I had kept pressed for 5 years. The bruise on my cheek was masked with concealer, but the swelling was visible. The board members, most of whom I only knew from video calls, stared at it. No one commented. The meeting was brutally efficient. Arthur Graves ran it. They didn't re-elect me. The vote had already passed. This was a formality, an activation. Eleanor Whitman is appointed Interim Chief Executive Officer for a term of 90 days. Arthur read from the resolution, his voice flat. She is granted emergency powers regarding personnel, procurement, and auditing, effective immediately. The outgoing CEO was not present. He had already been escorted from the building. I was handed a binder. The state of St. Gabriel was not just bad, it was catastrophic. Malpractice claims had risen by 40% in 8 months. The hospital-acquired infection rate, particularly in internal medicine, was nearly double the state compliance level. And the supply budget was hemorrhaging cash. We were spending more on basic supplies than any other hospital in the system. Yet the nurses were reporting critical shortages of everything from IV kits to basic antibiotics. I already knew the internal map. The chief of internal medicine, Dr. Nolan Pierce, was a brilliant diagnostician but a weak leader. He despised Sabrina's disruptive influence, but was terrified of the staffing chaos that would ensue if she, or the nurses loyal to her, walked out. The Human Resources Department, led by a man named Gary, was notoriously conflict-averse, preferring mediated solutions to actual enforcement. They were afraid of being sued. I accepted the binder and closed it. "Thank you, Arthur. I have my first directives." The room went silent. "First," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room, "I am activating an immediate 48-hour comprehensive audit. I want forensic accountants in by noon. Target areas are all departmental timesheets and overtime authorizations, all procurement contracts under $20,000, and a full reconciliation of the automated dispensing cabinets for all Schedule II narcotics. I also want a review of all shift change logs for the last 90 days. A few board members shifted. This was faster than they were used to. Second, I continued, looking directly at the head of internal legal, I want the full camera footage from the ICU hallway, time-stamped yesterday between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Please deliver it to my new office. Also, send me the hospital's official zero-tolerance workplace violence policy, the one that every employee signs during onboarding. I saw the flicker of understanding in Arthur's eyes. My phone, now a corporate-issued secure device, buzzed on the table. A message from Marcus. I ignored it. Third, legal will prepare a litigation hold for the internal medicine department. All emails, all internal messages, all draft documents are to be preserved. We assume a significant legal challenge is imminent. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. As the board members filed out, a woman who had been standing quietly in the corner approached me. She was older, in dark blue scrubs, her face etched with exhaustion. Lani Ortega, a 30-year veteran nurse, the kind who really runs the hospital. She waited until we were alone. "Mrs. Whitman," she said, her voice low. "I heard you were taking over. I am glad." "Lani, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." She didn't waste time. She slipped a small, black USB drive from her pocket and placed it on the polished mahogany table. 6, she said. 6 separate incident reports filed against Sabrina Lowell by my nurses in the last year. Intimidation, verbal abuse, scheduling retaliation. They all went to HR. They all disappeared. Those are the original copies I kept. I looked at the drive. It was the black box. "Thank you, Lani. You did the right thing." "She's a danger to this hospital," Lani said, her eyes hard. "And to the patients." She left, and I was alone in the cavernous room. I picked up my phone. The message from Marcus was frantic. "Mum, I heard there was a meeting. Please, don't make a big deal out of yesterday. Sabrina is just stressed. She's going to lose her job over a stupid slap." My fingers were steady as I typed the reply. I did not hesitate. "In a hospital. Marcus, consequences are not measured in reputation. They are measured in lives." I put the phone down and dialed my new assistant. "Please send a mandatory meeting invitation to every single member of the internal medicine department, including all nursing staff, residents, and Dr. Pierce." I said. Subject line, mandatory dialogue on departmental culture and safety. Signed by me, the new Chief Executive Officer. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon. Sabrina Lowell Whitman's attendance is not optional. The large conference room was stuffy, smelling of stale coffee and fear. We were 43 minutes into the mandatory dialogue, and the air was thick. I sat at the head of the U-shaped table, flanked by Gary from Human Resources and a grim-faced union representative. Sabrina sat directly opposite me, her posture rigid, a look of bored indignation plastered on her face. Dr. Nolan Pierce sat 2 chairs down from her, staring at his legal pad. The staff had been silent for the first 10 minutes, a sea of exhausted faces in blue and green scrubs. I did not fill the silence. I simply waited. Finally, Lani Ortega spoke, her voice clear. "We're afraid," she said. "We're afraid of the schedule. You question an order. You find yourself working 3 back-to-back night shifts on a weekend. You report a problem. You get an email about insubordination CC'd to Dr. Pierce and half the admin suite." Several nurses nodded. Sabrina merely inspected her fingernails. "She's right," a young resident near the door said, his voice barely a whisper. I recognized him as the one who had fled the hallway yesterday. "Last month, I was told to sign off on the quarterly supply inventory for the floor. The numbers didn't match the physical count. Not even close. I was told to sign it anyway, that it was a clerical lag that would be fixed." "Who told you that, Doctor?" I asked, my tone level. He looked at Sabrina, then quickly away. It was the department directive. From Nurse Lowell Whitman." Sabrina scoffed. "We had an urgent patient load. We cannot stop care to count bandages. I made an executive decision." That clerical lag included 2 missing boxes of high-dose morphine sulfate, Lani added, her voice dropping. A sharp intake of breath came from the HR representative. Before Sabrina could formulate a defense, I gestured to the woman sitting by the door. Mrs. Alonso. The woman I had been comforting in the ICU. I had personally invited her. "Mrs. Alonso," I said gently. "Would you be willing to share your experience with the department?" She stood, trembling, but her voice was surprisingly firm. "My mother is dying. I live 2 hours away. I drive here every day. Yesterday. That wasn't the first time. Nurse Lowell Whitman told me last week that if I kept pushing the call button and asking so many questions, my visitation would be restricted to 1 hour a day. She said I was disrupting the staff's workflow." "That is a lie," Sabrina snapped, her mask cracking. She was hysterical. "She was grieving," I corrected, my voice sharp and cold. "And she is not the only one. I have a file here of 17 similar complaints, all logged in the last 6 months, all closed without action." I turned my gaze to Dr. Pierce. "Doctor, you are the chief of this department. Why was this culture of intimidation allowed to fester? Why were these supply and scheduling issues ignored?" Dr. Pierce looked miserable. He loosened his tie. "Eleanor, Mrs. Whitman, you have to understand. We are perpetually short-staffed. Sabrina runs a tight ship. She keeps the nurses in line. If I pushed back, if she quit, or if half her loyal staff walked out with her, I would have to shut down half the floor. I was trying to manage the bigger picture. I was balancing risks." "You balanced incorrectly, Doctor," I said. "You traded patient safety for administrative convenience. HR, union. Please note Dr. Pierce's admission of negligent oversight." Gary from HR scribbled furiously. As if on cue, the conference room door opened, and Marcus bustled in, holding a large pink bakery box. "Hi, everyone. Sorry to interrupt," he said with a bright, false cheer. "I just wanted to drop off some pastries for the team. I know everyone is working so hard." He placed the box on the table, right in the middle of the tense silence. He looked at me, then at Sabrina, a desperate, pleading smile on his face. "Marcus," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "This is not a social gathering. This is a formal administrative review. You are not an employee of this department. Please leave." His smile evaporated. "I was just trying to leave now." He flushed, grabbed the box of pastries, and retreated, pulling the door shut behind him. The entire room had watched the exchange. The power dynamic shifted, a subtle, tectonic movement. I turned back to my notes. Now, to the data. While Dr. Pierce was balancing risks, the automated drug dispensing system for this floor shows an override rate for controlled substances that is 34% higher on shifts when Nurse Lowell Whitman was the charge nurse. That data is now with the auditors. A young nurse in the back row, one I didn't recognize, let out a small, choked sob. She looked terrified. "Speak," I commanded, but I softened my voice. "You are protected in this room. Speak." She stood, tears streaming down her face. 3 weeks ago," she whispered, "a patient was ordered 2 milligrams of lorazepam. The ampule was 10. I was new. I misread it. I almost pushed the whole thing. Sabrina caught me. She took the syringe. She didn't report it. She didn't have me file the near-miss paperwork, which is mandatory. She just said she owned me now. She said if I ever spoke up about the scheduling, she would report that I tried to kill a patient." The room was utterly still. Even Sabrina looked pale. This was the end of the dialogue. This was the beginning of the legal case. I closed my binder. "This meeting is over. Thank you all for your candor. My conclusion is preliminary, but clear. This department is operating under a culture of fear that represents an immediate and unacceptable legal and patient safety risk." I stood up. "As of this moment, I am signing an executive order. All shift changes for internal medicine are suspended. All scheduling will be handled by central administration, not by the floor supervisor, pending a full review. No one," I added, looking at every face in the room, "will be punished for what was said here today. You are dismissed." They filed out, silent and wide-eyed. Sabrina remained seated, glaring at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You can't do this," she hissed, as Dr. Pierce and the HR rep lingered by the door. "I just did," I replied, signing the directive in front of me. "Your authority over scheduling is gone. Do not go near the drug cabinets unless you are providing direct patient care. An investigation is now active." I returned to the executive suite. The previous CEO's nameplate was already gone, replaced by a simple, temporary one. E. Whitman. Interim CEO. My assistant had the files I requested waiting on the pristine desk. First, I watched the security video from the ICU hallway. It was not grainy. It was high definition, cold and objective. There was no audio, but the visual narrative was absolute. It showed me standing with Mrs. Alonso. It showed Sabrina's approach, her aggressive posture, the way she crowded my personal space. It showed the brief, sharp words. It showed her hand blurring as it struck my face, my glasses flying, and then the critical frame. As I bent, stunned, to retrieve my glasses, the camera captured Sabrina's face. She smiled. It was brief, a flicker of satisfied triumph, before her mask of professional indignation snapped back into place. I closed the video file. I did not need to see it again. Next. I opened the digital copy of the St. Gabriel Employee Handbook, downloaded from the hospital intranet. I navigated to Section 4, Subsection 2, Workplace Violence and Conduct. I read the single, binding sentence. Any act of physical aggression, threat, or intimidation directed at any employee, visitor, patient, or affiliate will result in immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination of employment. It did not say, may result. It said, will result. It was not a suggestion. It was a covenant. The first preliminary reports from the forensic auditors I had activated hit my secure inbox by 5 p.m. The team I brought in was fast. They specialized in healthcare fraud, and they knew exactly where to look. The first report was on procurement. A vendor named Front Range Supplies had been receiving escalating payments for the last 8 months, totaling over $100,000. The invoices were for basics, gauze, standard IV kits, sterile saline, and PPE. Every item was marked up by an average of 200% over our standard contract pricing. Every invoice was just under the $10,000 threshold that required senior executive approval. The threshold that Sabrina, as acting head nurse, could approve herself. The vendor's registered address was not a warehouse. It was a postal box at a mail center in a strip mall. The LLC was registered to a Mr. Leo Lowell. A quick search confirmed he was Sabrina's first cousin. The second report covered the timesheet audit. Sabrina's tight ship was a vessel for cronyism, on at least 14 separate occasions in the last quarter. She had manually approved overtime, or manually clocked in, 2 specific nurses who were, according to the building's keycard security logs, not physically on the premises at the time. These ghost shifts invariably occurred during weekends or holidays, maximizing the night and overtime pay differential. The third report was the one that made my stomach tighten. It was the reconciliation of the automated dispensing cabinets, the ADC logs. It was a spreadsheet of pure systemic danger. Sabrina's personal override code had been used 47 times in the past 60 days to access restricted Schedule II opioids, primarily Dilaudid and morphine, without a corresponding physician's order being entered into the system. The justification note in the override field was always the same: patient pain, verbal order. But the auditors had cross-referenced the charts. In 7 of those cases, the patient charts showed no record of acute distress, no follow-up charting to confirm the dose, and no physician co-signature within the required 24-hour window. The narcotics had simply evaporated into the thin, sterile air. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Gary in Human Resources. "Gary," I said, "I am forwarding you 3 preliminary audit summaries, the video file from the ICU hallway, and the contents of a USB drive provided by Nurse Ortega. We have a situation." I emailed the files. I could hear the clicks of his mouse, followed by a long, heavy silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, all the usual bureaucratic fluff gone. "My God, Eleanor, this is criminal." "Yes," I said. "You will open a formal case immediately. 3 counts. Workplace violence, per Section 4.2, procurement fraud, and controlled substances irregularities. I want it all by the book. Gary." And Nurse Lowell Whitman," he stammered. "She is an active liability to this institution and its patients. She cannot be on the floor. You will place her on administrative leave, with pay effective immediately. Send the notification to her secure hospital email. Her access is to be revoked at the moment she opens it. Understood, he said, his voice snapping to attention. I was reviewing the new draft for the supply chain locks when my personal cell phone, the one I kept for family, began to vibrate violently on the desk. It was Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. He called back. Immediately. I answered. He did not say hello. He was shouting, his voice high and cracking with a panic I knew too well. They locked her out. They locked her out of her email. She got a notification. She's on leave. What did you do? I am doing my job. Marcus, I said, my voice quiet, contrasting his hysteria. You are killing my marriage, he yelled, the sound tinny and desperate. You're destroying her. This is because she slapped you. This is insane. This is revenge. I held the phone away from my ear, letting his rage spend itself against the silence of my office. The slap was a symptom. Marcus, I finally said, my voice cold and precise. Not the disease. The disease is fraud, theft, and patient endangerment. Sabrina prescribed her own downfall. I am just reading the physician's orders. I hung up before he could respond. I turned back to my corporate email. The audit had identified the loophole department heads approving vendors under $10,000. I spent the next hour drafting and signing a new executive directive, effective immediately. All new vendor approvals, regardless of cost, were centralized. All existing vendor contracts under $50,000 were frozen, pending a full review by the CEO's office. The pipeline to front-range supplies was severed. The money tap was turned off. I hit send, distributing the memo to all department heads. The bleeding had stopped. The preliminary disciplinary meeting was held in a neutral administrative conference room, A12, at 4 p.m. The air conditioning was running so high, the room was uncomfortably cold. Gary, the HR director, sat at the head of the table. He looked nervous, but he also looked prepared, flanked by Maria from the hospital's legal counsel and the senior union representative. I sat on the long side of the table, not as chair, but as attendee. Sabrina arrived precisely on time, dressed in an immaculate dark grey pantsuit, her hair pulled back. She was not alone. She was accompanied by a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit, who placed a heavy leather briefcase on the table and introduced himself as Mr. Klein, her private attorney. Gary began, his voice reading from a prepared script. This is a preliminary review to discuss formal complaints filed against nurse Sabrina Lowell Whitman regarding workplace violence, potential procurement irregularities, and controlled substance handling. Mr. Klein cut him off, holding up a hand. Let's be clear about what this is. This is a retaliatory action by my client's mother-in-law, who has staged a corporate takeover and is now abusing her new power. Regarding the alleged slap, my client was responding to an urgent patient care situation. Sabrina spoke, her voice measured and sympathetic. It was a defensive reflex. Mrs. Whitman was agitated and blocking the primary ICU corridor during a high-stress moment. I was trying to move past her to assist my staff. She was impeding an emergency route. I must have just reached out. It was regrettable, but unintentional. I remained silent. I looked at Gary. Thank you for that context. Mr. Klein. Nurse Lowell Whitman, Gary said, clicking a mouse. We will now review the security footage from the corridor in question. The large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was a high-definition, silent feed. It showed the corridor. It was, at that moment, almost empty. There was no emergency, no crash cart, no running doctors. It showed me standing still, speaking with Mrs. Alonso. It showed Sabrina approaching, stepping directly into my personal space. It showed her hand lifting, not in a reflex, but in a full, deliberate arc, connecting with my cheek. It showed her standing back, a small, triumphant smile flickering across her face as I recoiled. Mr. Klein watched the screen, his expression neutral. Sabrina's jaw tightened. "As the footage clearly demonstrates," I said, my voice cutting the cold air. There was no emergency. The corridor was not blocked. I was not agitated. You advanced on me, and you struck me, deliberately. "This proves my point," Klein snapped, pivoting instantly. "This entire proceeding is compromised. Mrs. Whitman is the alleged victim, the interim CEO, and the chair of the board. She is acting as judge, jury, and executioner in a family squabble. We demand this hearing be nullified." Before I could answer, Gary held up his hand. "Mr. Klein, your concern is noted, which is why we are following hospital bylaws precisely. I, as the Director of Human Resources, am chairing this meeting, not Mrs. Whitman. She is present today in two capacities only: as the complainant regarding the assault, and as the non-voting CEO, as required by our charter when matters of severe financial irregularities and patient safety are discussed. She has been formally recused from any subsequent board vote on this matter. The process is clean." Klein's pen tapped his legal pad. His first line of defense was gone. "In that case," Gary continued, "let's move to the financial evidence." Maria, the hospital lawyer, took over. "We have procurement records for a vendor, Front Range Supplies, approved exclusively by Nurse Lowell Whitman, for just over $100,000 in the past 8 months. This vendor, which is an LLC registered to a postal box, is owned by a Mr. Leo Lowell, your cousin." Sabrina's composure finally cracked. A dull flush crept up her neck. "And the ADC logs," I added, pushing a single-page graph across the table. "This chart shows override rates for Schedule 2 narcotics on the internal medicine floor. The baseline is flat. The spikes, representing a 34% jump in unauthorized withdrawals, align perfectly, day by day, with Nurse Lowell Whitman's charge nurse shifts. We have isolated 7 incidents where you withdrew Dilaudid citing patient pain with no corresponding chart, no physician order, and no follow-up." "This is circumstantial," Klein muttered, but he looked shaken. "We also have the testimony of Nurse Lani Ortega," Gary said, "who has provided 6 prior reports from nurses detailing a culture of intimidation and pressure to ignore these irregularities. And," he paused, "we have the statement of Dr. Nolan Pierce. I had insisted Dr. Pierce attend. He was brought in, and he looked ill. He refused to look at Sabrina." "Dr. Pierce," Gary asked, "were you aware of the staff complaints regarding Nurse Lowell Whitman?" Pierce stared at his hands. I had heard things. About the scheduling. About supplies. And you did not report them." "I was afraid," he said, his voice barely audible. "I was terrified of a staffing collapse. She keeps them in line. I was afraid if I confronted her, she and her core staff would walk, and I would lose half my floor. I delayed." "Thank you, Doctor," Gary said, Pierce fled the room. Gary closed his folder. Mr. Klein, Sabrina. Based on the video evidence of the assault, the direct financial conflict of interest, the pattern of intimidation, the admission of negligence from the department head, and the alarming statistical evidence of controlled substance diversion. This committee finds significant and severe grounds for violation. This is no longer a simple HR matter. We are escalating this to a full, formal hospital disciplinary hearing, which will rule on termination for cause and our obligation to refer this to the district attorney. The meeting was over. Klein began packing his briefcase, his face grim. He knew he had lost. Sabrina stood. She did not look at her lawyer. She looked only at me. Her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. She leaned forward, and her voice was a low, venomous hiss. "You will regret this, Eleanor." I met her gaze. I did not raise my voice. I let the cold, quiet authority of the room speak for me. This hospital has regretted enough. Sabrina, this hearing is adjourned. He was waiting for me when I got home. He was sitting at my kitchen table under the harsh overhead light, which carved shadows under his eyes. He had brought takeout containers, Chinese food, his traditional peace offering. They sat on the counter, unopened and already cold. The house was dead quiet, save for the low, cycling hum of the refrigerator. He looked up when I walked in, still in my suit. His face was pale and drawn. "You have to stop this," he said. His voice was raw, desperate. "Mum, please, I am begging you. You have to drop the complaint about the slap." I didn't move, didn't sit. I remained standing by the counter. "If you just withdraw the workplace violence charge," he continued, the words tumbling out. "Klein said they can fight the other stuff. He said the paperwork, the supplies, that is all just noise. They can tie it up. But the assault, that's the one they can't spin. You are destroying my marriage. Mom, she is my wife." "And what is she?" "Marcus," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "A wife? Or a liability? Why are you doing this?" he pleaded, standing up, his chair scraping loudly on the tile. "This is family. You are my mother. Just pull back." For me, I unpinned the gold angel wings from my lapel and set them on the counter next to the cold food. This stopped being about family the moment her hand touched my face in that hallway. It stopped being about family when the first audit report on patient safety landed on my desk. This is not about choosing your wife or your mother, Marcus. This is about choosing right or wrong. And you are standing firmly on the wrong side of that line. "You don't understand," he whispered, his face crumbling. "You don't know the company, Front Range." "I know all about Front Range," I said. "Her cousin's company, the one registered to a postal box, billing us 200% markups for basic gauze." He flinched, a full-body recoil. "She told me it was just a small business, to help her family. She said the hospital's procurement rules were stupid, that it was just cutting through red tape. She used hospital funds meant for patient care, to steal over $100,000. Marcus, that is not cutting red tape. That is felony theft. She needed a corporate card to set up the vendor account," he said, the words spilling out in a desperate, choked rush. So quiet I almost couldn't hear him. "She said her credit was bad from school. She asked me to co-sign." I froze. A cold dread, heavier than anything I had felt in the boardroom, settled in my stomach. "Marcus, what did you do?" I didn't co-sign, he said, staring at the floor. He was shaking. She used my name. I let her. I gave her my social security number, the corporate card for Front Range Supplies. It is in my name. The LLC. I am the listed president. The air left my lungs. The empty water glass I had picked up when I walked in, forgotten in my hand, slipped. It shattered on the tile floor, the sound like a gunshot in the heavy silence. He didn't even jump. He just stood there, broken. Marcus, I said, the name a cold weight. You are not just a witness. You are not her husband, covering for her. You are a co-conspirator. You are her legal accomplice. When the district attorney files charges, they will not just be for her. They will be for you. He finally broke. It was not loud. It was a complete, silent collapse. His head falling into his hands, his shoulders shaking as he sobbed without making a sound. I didn't know, he choked out. I didn't know where the money was coming from. I didn't ask. I just wanted her to be happy. I just wanted her to stop being angry at me all the time. He wasn't just paralyzed in the hallway. He had been paralyzed for his entire marriage. I did not move to comfort him. Not yet. I spoke to him as I would any compromised employee. You have one way out, I said, my voice hard and clear. It is not a guarantee, but it is a chance. You will walk away from her. Tonight. You will turn over every email, every bank statement, and every text message related to Front Range. You will provide a full, voluntary confession to the hospital's legal counsel and, when the time comes, to the DA. You will cooperate as a witness. If you do it now, before they subpoena you, they might see you as a victim of coercion rather than a partner in the crime. He looked up, his face a ruin. Why are you like this? Why are you so cold? You just retired and got hard. You never used to be this way. Hard. The accusation struck a nerve deep and old. You think I'm hard? You think I just retired? I didn't retire. Marcus, I quit. I quit the COO job, the job I loved, the job that defined me, because your father was dying. I quit so I could spend the last 6 months of his life holding his hand and emptying his bedpans and listening to him cry at 3 a.m. I did it because he needed me. And I did it alone, because you were too busy building your new life. I never told you that. I never told anyone. I just did it. That is what you do for family. You do not enable them. You do not sign your name on their fraud. You show up. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him with the shattered glass and the cold, unopened food. I went into the garage. It was dark, and the air smelled of old oil and cold concrete. I leaned against my car, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving only a deep, profound ache. The door from the kitchen opened a minute later, spilling yellow light into the darkness. Marcus stood there, silhouetted. He walked toward me slowly, stopping just in front of me. He didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around me, his head dropping onto my shoulder, and held on. He was taller than me, but he felt like a little boy. The low, thrumming hum of the deep freezer in the corner was the only sound, a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. I'm sorry, he whispered into my suit jacket. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I held him. For a moment, I was just his mother. Then, my corporate phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen glowed, illuminating the garage. It was a calendar alert from Gary in HR. Subject final disciplinary hearing, St. Gabriel Medical Center versus S. Lowell Whitman. Confirmed. Boardroom C. Tuesday, 9 a.m. I looked at the date. Tuesday. 5 days away. I closed the notification. I looked over my son's shoulder into the dark garage. On that day, I realized I would not just be the victim testifying. I would be the chief executive officer finalizing the judgment. I would be the boss of the boss who fired her. The 5 days leading up to the formal hearing were a surgical preparation. I did not sleep in my own bed. I slept on the cot in the CEO's office. The battle was already over. This was simply the sterilization of the room and the counting of the instruments. By 6 a.m. on the first morning, my first system-wide internal memorandum was in every St. Gabriel employee's inbox. The subject line was a commitment to safety and integrity. It was a clean, cold document. It detailed, without emotion, the hospital's zero-tolerance policy for workplace violence, procurement fraud, and behavior that compromised patient care. It concluded with a mandatory directive every single employee, starting with senior management, was required to digitally re-sign the updated code of conduct by 5 p.m. Friday. It was not a request. It was a new baseline for employment. Simultaneously, I mandated an emergency, all-hands training summit for every department head, floor manager, and charge nurse. The topics were controlled substance chain of custody and workplace violence reporting and de-escalation. Attendance was logged. Dr. Nolan Pierce was in the front row, taking notes. While the managers were in training, I was with legal and IT. They had, per my order, already secured the litigation hold on Sabrina's and Marcus's email accounts. I gave them the specific keywords front range, invoice, schedule, override, and Leo. The external audit firm I had hired delivered its final report on Front Range. It was beautiful in its criminality. Front Range Supplies was merely the first layer. The money paid to the Postal Box LLC was then transferred, minus a small fee, to a second shell company, a Delaware-based consulting firm. From there, it was moved a third time into a high-yield holding account. The signatory on that final account was not Leo Lowell, it was Sabrina. With the ADC logs showing the opioid diversion and the audit showing the 3-layer financial structure, I had a legal and moral obligation. I instructed the hospital's chief counsel to prepare our initial notification to the Drug Enforcement Administration. We were a licensed healthcare facility, reporting a significant and verifiable internal diversion of Schedule II narcotics. The consequences were now far outside the walls of the hospital. The internal medicine floor, however, was adrift. The staff were terrified, rudderless, and overworked. I walked onto the floor at noon, in the middle of the shift change. I found Lani Ortega at the nurses' station, her face exhausted. In front of her entire staff, I formally offered her the position of interim head nurse of internal medicine, with a corresponding pay increase, effective immediately. The wave of visible, audible relief that passed through the nursing staff was like a fever breaking. For the first time, I saw a few of them smile. Morale, I knew, was as critical as medicine. After that, I returned to my office and closed the door. I pulled the file of 17 unresolved patient complaints that had languished in the system. I called every one of those families. I introduced myself as the new CEO. I apologized. I listened to their anger and their grief. and I detailed the exact procedural changes being implemented to ensure what happened to them would never happen again. Our real-time patient satisfaction scores, which had been in a freefall, ticked up 2 points by the end of the day. That evening, Marcus came to my office. He was not the broken man I had left in my kitchen. He was pale and quiet, but his eyes were clear. He carried an old, silver external hard drive. "This is from my old PC, before I moved in with her," he said. He placed it on my desk. It made a solid, heavy sound. "It has the original draft contracts she had me review for Front Range, and the spreadsheets. The ones where she was calculating the rounded-up prices before she finalized the invoices. She called it market adjustment. I told her I thought it looked wrong. She said I didn't understand business. I did not touch the hard drive. Marcus, you know that once you give this to me, it becomes evidence. It will be used." "I know," he said, meeting my eyes. "I just want it to be over." I picked up the phone and called the head of legal to come and retrieve it. The hospital grapevine, however, was buzzing. Sabrina, though banned from the premises, was not silent. We learned from 3 different nurses that she was calling her loyalists, one by one, from her personal phone. She was promising promotions. She was promising pay raises. She was telling them that this was all a family dispute, that I was unstable, and that when she was reinstated after the hearing, she would clean house of anyone who did not support her. Gary from HR rushed into my office, his face blotchy with panic. "She's threatening witnesses. She's trying to poison the hearing. This is jury tampering." I held up a hand. "I know." "Gary." "What do you mean, you know?" "I was wondering when she would overplay her hand," I said. "Sabrina is making these calls to staff on her hospital-issued cell phone, the one she has not yet returned." "Correct." I think so. Yes. Per the Code of Conduct, she just re-signed last year. There is no expectation of privacy on hospital-issued devices when used to contact employees about hospital business, especially while on administrative leave. I had IT flag her account. Legal has been transcribing every single threat and every single promise. Please inform Mr. Klein that we will be adding charge number 4 to the hearing witness intimidation and retaliation. Gary simply stared at me, his mouth open. "We are prepared," I said. "This is not a fight. This is a procedure." Boardroom C was a formal, intimidating room on the top floor, reserved for serious matters. It had no windows. The hearing panel was seated at a long, elevated mahogany table, giving it the unfortunate air of a tribunal. Gary from HR, as the official chair of the disciplinary committee, sat in the center. He was flanked by Maria from legal, Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief medical officer, the senior union representative, and Arthur Graves, representing the board in my stead. I sat at a separate, smaller table to the side, in my capacity as CEO and complainant. Sabrina and her lawyer, Mr. Klein, sat directly opposite the panel. Marcus was not present. He was sequestered as a witness, should he be needed. Gary called the hearing to order. "This is the formal disciplinary hearing for Nurse Sabrina Lowell Whitman. This panel will hear the evidence and render a finding." Mr. Klein stood immediately. "Before we begin, let the record show that this is a sham proceeding. My client is the victim of a vindictive, personal campaign by her mother-in-law, Mrs. Whitman, who, in a stunning abuse of power, installed herself as CEO specifically to destroy my client's career. We are here to demand not just immediate reinstatement, but a full, public apology from this hospital and from Mrs. Whitman personally. Sabrina sat tall, the picture of a wronged professional, nodding gravely at her lawyer's words. Gary, to his credit, did not flinch. Your opening statement is noted, Mr. Klein. We will now proceed with the hospital's presentation. Charge 1, workplace violence. Maria from legal stood. The hospital presents exhibit a security footage from the ICU hallway, dated October 21st. She played the video on the large screens, the slap, the glasses flying, the cold, triumphant smile. The panel watched, stone-faced. We also present Exhibit B, Maria continued. The signed St. Gabriel Code of Conduct, Section 4.2, which states, and I quote, any act of physical aggression directed at any visitor will result in immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination of employment. This is a zero-tolerance policy. That was a reflex. Klein objected. She was blocking an emergency path. The video shows no emergency, Maria countered smoothly. And we have 2 sworn affidavits, one from Nurse Lani Ortega and one from a visitor, Mrs. Alonso, attesting that Nurse Lowell Whitman was the sole aggressor. We moved to charge 2 procurement fraud. She put up a new slide. It was a simple, damning flowchart. It showed the St. Gabriel accounts, an arrow pointing to Front Range Supplies LLC, and then a second arrow pointing to the Delaware Shell Company, and a third arrow pointing to a high-yield savings account. This chart demonstrates a flow of just over $100,000 from this hospital into an account held by a shell company, which is in turn owned by another company, which is in turn owned by you, Nurse Lowell Whitman. The initial vendor, Front Range, is an LLC registered to your cousin, Leo Lowell. My client is an enterprising businesswoman. Klein shot back. She found a vendor who could supply materials during a shortage. There is no policy against using a vendor run by a relative, only that it be disclosed. She was in the process of filing that paperwork when she was summarily suspended. Then let's move to charge 3 controlled substances irregularities, Maria said, her voice hardening. We present the ADC logs from internal medicine, showing 47 overrides using Nurse Lowell Whitman's code over 60 days, resulting in the withdrawal of high-dose dilaudid and morphine sulfate. We also present 7 corresponding patient charts, which show no physician's order, no record of acute distress, and no follow-up charting for these withdrawals. Dr. Finch, the CMO, spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with disapproval. Nurse Lowell Whitman, this is not a paperwork issue. This is a critical, unexplained diversion of Schedule II narcotics. This represents a profound risk to patient safety and a severe breach of federal law. This is statistical noise, Klein argued. We are talking about a busy, understaffed floor. Nurses are constantly pulling meds on verbal orders during a crisis. The idea that... Maria cut him off. We also have Charge 4, a new development. This exhibit is an email, recovered from a preserved hard drive, sent from Nurse Lowell Whitman to Mr. Marcus Whitman, regarding the initial formation of Front Range Supplies. She projected the email. Sabrina's name was at the top. The text was short. Marcus, I just need you to sign the LLC papers as president. Use the corporate card I had you open. It's just a formality to get the vendor account active. Don't worry. Your mum will never check. She's just a useless old board member. A heavy, absolute silence filled the room. Sabrina's face went white. Mr. Klein stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He had clearly never seen this. And finally, Maria said, Charge 5. Witness intimidation and retaliation. We have transcripts taken from Nurse Lowell Whitman's hospital-issued phone while she was on administrative leave, of 5 separate calls to junior nursing staff. In these calls, she promises pay raises and promotions to those who stay loyal, and threatens that she will clean house of anyone who cooperates with this investigation. Klein, recovering, stood up, his face red. This is outrageous. This entire panel is compromised. You bring in this theatrical, last-minute evidence, all of it supplied by the CEO, who is the complainant. This is not a hearing. It is a kangaroo court run by Eleanor Whitman. I demand this proceeding be thrown out. He pointed directly at me. Before I could speak, Arthur Graves leaned forward, his voice calm and carrying absolute authority. Mr. Klein, please sit down. You are correct that Mrs. Whitman is the CEO. You are incorrect about her role here. He picked up a piece of paper. I am reading from the formal minutes of the board meeting, dated October 26th. The board hereby affirms that for the duration of the disciplinary proceedings concerning Sabrina Lowell Whitman, all executive authority regarding this matter is vested solely in this committee. Mrs. Whitman is formally recused from any vote, deliberation, or finding. She is present today, as required by our charter, as the non-voting head of the hospital, and as the primary complainant on Charge 1. Your objection is overruled. The process is, and has been, immaculate. Klein sat down, defeated. Gary cleared his throat. The panel will now deliberate. This hearing is in recess for 10 minutes. The panel stood and filed into a private side room. Sabrina did not look at her lawyer. She did not look at anyone. She stared at the email on the screen, her face a mask of cold fury. They were gone for less than 5 minutes. Gary, Arthur, and the others returned to their seats. Gary put on his glasses. After reviewing the 5 charges, Gary read, and the corresponding evidence, this committee has reached a unanimous finding. On Charge 1, workplace violence, we find a clear violation of the zero-tolerance policy. On Charge 2, procurement fraud, we find gross financial misconduct. On Charge 3, controlled substances irregularities, we find severe patient safety endangerment. On Charge 4 and 5, we find gross breaches of professional conduct and ethics. The committee's recommendation is twofold. First, immediate termination of employment for Sabrina Lowell Whitman. For cause? Second, that the hospital's legal counsel will immediately forward this entire file, including all exhibits and testimony, to the Riverton District Attorney's Office and the Drug Enforcement Administration for criminal review. Mr. Klein was stuffing papers into his briefcase, his face a mask of professional defeat. Sabrina, however, did not move. She sat frozen, the blood drained from her face, staring at the empty space where the evidence had been displayed. Then, very slowly, she stood. She ignored her lawyer's whisper to sit down. She ignored the panel. She walked the few steps to my table, placing her palms flat on the wood, leaning in close. Her voice was not loud. It was a low, venomous hiss, for my ears only. You only won because of power, she whispered, her eyes burning with pure, distilled hatred. You came in here. You took over. And you rigged the game. This was never a fair fight. I did not lean back. I did not flinch. I met her gaze, and my voice was just as quiet. but it was solid, like bedrock. "You are wrong," I said. "I won because of the rules. The rules you decided were for other people. The rules that protect patients from having their medication stolen. The rules that protect junior nurses from being bullied. The rules that protect the very people you were convinced had no one to defend them. I just enforced them." Gary, seeing the confrontation, stood abruptly and spoke, his voice filling the room, reading the final, formal judgment into the record. "The panel's decision is unanimous and final. The employment of Sabrina Lowell Whitman is terminated, for cause, effective immediately. She is barred from re-employment at any St. Gabriel-affiliated facility for a period of 5 years. A permanent notation will be placed in her file, and she will be added to the internal Do Not Rehire list. Furthermore, as previously stated, this complete file, including all findings on financial fraud and narcotics diversion, will be transferred to the Riverton District Attorney and the Drug Enforcement Administration by 5 p.m. today." A sharp ping sounded from the laptops on the panel's table. Arthur Graves, who had been monitoring his own email, looked down, then up at me. A very small, very rare smile touched the corners of his mouth. "It seems members of the committee," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence, "that the rest of the board, who were monitoring this hearing remotely, have just concluded their own emergency vote in light of these findings. As of 9:30 a.m., they have voted unanimously to make Mrs. Whitman's position official. Congratulations. Madam CEO, your interim contract is dissolved. You are now the permanent Chief Executive Officer of St. Gabriel Medical Center, with a full 2-year term." Sabrina staggered back, as if I had physically slapped her. The power she accused me of taking had just been made absolute, cemented by her own downfall. Maria, the hospital's lawyer, added the final, precise blow. "And Mr. Klein," she said, addressing Sabrina's stunned attorney, "regarding your client's assumed co-conspirator, Mr. Marcus Whitman signed a full witness cooperation agreement with the District Attorney's Office 2 days ago, in exchange for his testimony and the evidence he provided, and contingent upon his full repayment of the $100,000. The DA has agreed to defer prosecution. He has also agreed to perform 500 hours of community service. Here, in this hospital." Sabrina's head whipped around to her lawyer, her face a mask of betrayal. "He what?" He had known nothing. Marcus had finally, definitively, chosen a side. "We are done here," Klein said, his voice flat. He grabbed Sabrina's arm. "Sabrina, we are leaving now." He pulled her, rigid and shaking with silent rage, toward the boardroom doors. She threw them open, ready to storm into the hallway. And she froze, standing directly in her path, waiting patiently, were 2 individuals, a man and a woman, both in unremarkable suits, their badges clipped to their belts. They were not hospital staff. "Sabrina Lowell Whitman," the man asked, his voice polite. "I'm Detective Harris, Riverton PD, Financial Crimes. This is Detective Chen, Narcotics. We have a warrant to search your residence, and we have a few questions for you about a company called Front Range Supplies. We'd like you to come with us, please." They flanked her, and as Klein began to protest, they simply escorted her down the hall toward the public elevator. I watched her go until she was out of sight. I turned back to the room. The panel was gathering their papers. "You have a hospital to run, Eleanor," Arthur said, Nodding to me, I sat down at my laptop. I had one last piece of business. I opened a memorandum I had drafted the night before. It was an executive directive. It announced the formal restructuring of the internal medicine department. It dissolved the temporary acting head nurse position and created a new, permanent role, clinical nursing director. Nursing. I moved my cursor to the appointment line and typed in a single name, Lani Ortega. I hit send. It was done. Later that afternoon, I left the executive suite. I walked down the stairs to the ICU. I walked down that same hallway. The nurses at the station looked up when I approached. The young resident who had turned away in fear days ago was there, writing charts. He saw me. He stood up a little straighter, and he met my eyes. He nodded. The other nurses, the ones who had been too afraid to speak, they all looked at me. No one flinched, no one looked away. I stood there, breathing in the familiar, sharp scent of antiseptic, listening to the low, steady beeping of the monitors. I made a silent promise. I will fix this place. I will fix it one shift at a time, one procedure at a time, and one protected hand at a time. I walked to the main elevator. As the steel doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the polished surface. The doors closed, and the small digital screen inside lit up with the latest internal announcement. My memo, the one I had just sent. It read, "From today, it is safe to do the right thing." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are all listening from, so please comment below and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video. And if you can, please support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.